Welcome to Aunty Lou's Hour. If you like this podcast, please like, comment, share, and subscribe.
Hello to the lovely Stephen Doyle, all the way from Dublin, photographer, nurse, great friend. All right?
All right.
Oh, Stephen. So glad that you're on here because you spend so many time talking to others. It's really nice to hear a little bit about you.
Mm.
So we just kick off? I want a bit of you, Steve. Like, when were you born and what was it like growing up for you?
Um, oh, um, so I grew up in Dublin and was born in Dublin, and growing up was tough. Um, was bullied quite a lot.
Wow.
It was very tough. The younger years were very tough. But I kind of got over that. I grew up and got over that. And when I was 17, I moved to London.
Oh,
So I was in London when I was 17, and then I was there for about 4 years.
what part of London?
So I actually when I went to London first, I stayed in Euston Square in a bed and
Ah,
breakfast because I had nowhere to stay. And then I met some people that I'd known from clubbing and stuff here in Dublin, and then we lived in a squat.
sorry, you should have told me you went clubbing. What kind of music was you into back in the olden days?
Oh, we were into the Cure, Susie and the Banshees. What?
Susie and the Banshees. I remember.
Like, we used to go to the Camden Palace. We used to go to the Hippodrome. Um, like clubs on Tottenham Court Road. Like, it was great. Um, but so I was in a squat for a while, and then I came back home, and then I went back to London. I stayed in Croydon in a flat,
Yeah.
and then I was there for a few months, and then I moved up past up beside King's Cross,
Yeah.
and then I moved around. I moved all over London, lived all over London. The last place I lived in was in Arsenal.
Mm.
Yeah, I loved
Mm.
Arsenal.
So So after you moved around and stuff, like what got you into nursing? At what point did you like how did that happen?
Yeah, so nursing was way after that. So when I was 18, I came back to London, or I came back to Dublin for Christmas, and we were all sitting down watching I'm actually looking at you on the screen and not looking at the camera. So we were all looking at we're having Christmas dinner and we're looking at the TV. And do you remember Annika Rice?
Yes, I do.
So
Yeah.
Annika Rice, big shout out to Annika Rice, because she changed, in a way, she kind of changed my life. But she did a program called Challenge Annika.
I remember. Yeah.
She was challenged to go to Romania to refurbish an orphanage for kids. So this was like in the late 80s. And I don't know if you've ever seen that program about the Romanian orphanage, but it was quite sad. Dilapidated buildings, maybe one toilet for maybe like 100 kids and stuff like that, and the stench and stuff. And that was the first that hit her when when she went in, and we were all sitting there, and I was like paralyzed. I couldn't put the food to my mouth,
Yeah.
the TV, and kids sleeping in their cots, and they were tied to their cots, and kids just lying there, and they were rocking themselves from side to side, and it just broke my heart.
Yeah.
And I said to my mother, I was like, "Oh my God, I'd love to do some work like that." And she says, "Oh, she says you need to be a doctor or a nurse. You need to be specially trained for that. You couldn't do that." So I
Yeah.
was like, okay. So I kind of left it aside and went back to London. Um, it was really, it was, it seared like into my brain.
Yeah.
And after a few years, I was at some talk. A friend of mine said she'd worked with street children in Calcutta,
Yeah.
and I, it just the whole Romanian thing kind of just came back to me. And then I was actually back in Dublin, and I was doing work. I used to work in the fashion industry and acting.
Mhm.
Was doing I was doing a film. I was doing extra work on the film, big film, and
Yeah.
then I finished this, and um, was looking through the yellow pages, and I seen Romania. I was looking at the yellow pages. I was looking at charities, and I seen Romania, and then everything came back into my mind, and I contacted them and asked them if I could go to volunteer, and I contacted 3 organisations here in Dublin, and they all accepted me. After I filled out the information about myself, and I chose to go to a hospital in Bucharest where kids were living with HIV,
Mhm.
and I was there for 3 months.
Yeah.
I managed to get about $3,000 up. Well, it was Irish punts, and then I changed that into dollars, and then went to Bucharest um, for 3 months. And those 3 months kind of just completely changed everything for me. Like, um, so that was my kind of um, introduction into nursing.
Wow. Wow.
Um,
They do say that people have a calling for these things, and it sounds like you had this calling, so to speak, to
yeah,
kind
but
of.
it wasn't for like maybe 7 years after that, because I'd worked with those I was there working with kids who were all abandoned because they had contracted HIV, and um, they were it was really really tough to look at them. They were very skinny, scrawny kids, a lot of warts on their faces, very swollen abdomens. Really, 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 really sick children. But then there were other kids that were running around, and they were very active and, you know, mischievous like kids are. And yeah, it was just we had 3 floors. There was a ground floor, which was the ICU, and those
Mm.
kids. There was a ground floor, first floor, second floor. The first floor kids were kids with special needs, autism, and physical kind of deformities, and then the second floor was from kids who were really active. And so when the kids went to the ground floor, they would never go back up to the first or second, because that's when their lives would end.
Yeah.
Kids would kind of just disappear off the floors, and yeah, and a lot of the kids. I remember a lot of the kids had weeping ear infections, foul smelling ear infections. They had lots of warts on their faces. They had a lot of ringworm. And back then we didn't have any ARVs. Um, and they would be given like this. They would be given like semolina to eat, and rice, and rice puddings they'd be eating, and like big vats of it they would give it and give it to kids. Yeah, it was just like it was just a huge eye opener, like to the world of HIV, the world of caring for kids, caring for people. And then to what happened was, when I was in the villa where I was staying, there was a journalist from the Irish Times
Oh,
sharing this
yeah.
room with me, and he said, do you know that there are kids living in the sewers of this city?" I was like, "What do you mean in the sewers?" was like, down in the manholes. He's like, yeah. I was like, what? I was horrified. So seeing a kid, knowing that I've been in Romania looking after kids with HIV/AIDS, and then knowing that a kid was in a sewer, I was like, it was just like it was like double
Yeah.
trauma. It was like, oh my
Were
God.
these kids living with HIV, the ones that were in the sewers?
So I didn't know. I didn't know. So what I did was, we were told not to go out on the streets on our own because it was dangerous. And we were foreigners, and this was what we were kind of scared. We were scared mongered into, don't go out and don't mix with Romanians because they're very kind of ill people, and
Yeah.
they're very dangerous. And we were like, they're just people like they're everyone else. And we all went out, you know. Um, and I was back then I was in a church, and I'd met people from the church. I'm not a religious person, but I was
Yeah.
back then I think I was kind of searching and stuff like that, but I was
Yeah.
this kind of church, and I met some people who I'm still friends with today. Um, but they kind of showed me the Romanian life. But I told two of the people that I wanted to go to the Gara de Nord, which is like the North Station. That's where I
Yeah.
was told where the kids were. And I brought like bags and bags of oranges and apples and bananas. Bananas were a huge luxury back then.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
bought bars of chocolate. I had all this money, and like, I was like $5 would last you maybe like 2 or 3 days in Romania. This stuff
Yeah.
was so I bought so much stuff for the kids, and I brought it down to the station, and I seen all these kids sniffing bags of glue, and then I went over to them and they started throwing stuff at me, and they hit me here in the head with a stone. They thought I was
Yeah.
some predator, which I'm not. I started crying because these kids, and it was minus 20, minus 15, like the snow was thick on the ground, it was up to nearly our knees. And these kids they were like wild animals.
Yeah.
And it was horrific. And they had hardly any clothes on them in the snow. And I could see their limbs were blue and stuff, and they were shivering, and they were blowing this bag of glue. And it's called Aurolac, which is like a paint thinners. They would sniff this, and I was like, what's going on here? Like, who are these kids? You know, and they were young kids, like 5, 6 years of age. And I was like, this is madness. Like, this is
Yeah.
mental.
Yeah.
So I went back to a back of the station. I met this nun, and she told me, what was going on with these kids it was a social problem. So I was like, okay. So she told me the kids were coming from like abusive backgrounds. They were running from orphanages, and I was like, oh, okay. So I would go to the hospital on a daily basis. We do morning shifts and we do the afternoon shifts. So I would go either in the morning or the afternoon to work my shift in the hospital with the kids, and then I'd go out and I'd bring like a rucksack full of food and sandwiches and stuff, and I'd bring it or bread, and I'd bring it to the station, and I'd say to the kids, I'll meet you here, and I just give them the food. And then they showed me where they lived, and I wanted to see what was in the sewer. So I took pictures of them
Oh
just to doc.
wow.
So I was horrified. And I was telling all the volunteers in the house, there was 11 of us in the house, and I was telling them all, and they were like, "Oh yeah, but we're not here for that, and you could pick up infection, and you shouldn't really go there because you could give that to the kids." And I was like, "I understand." So I would every time we would be in the streets with the kids, I'd always come home and have a really hot shower, and I'd
Yeah.
scrub myself. So then if I was going into the hospital, then
Yeah.
I would shower sometimes as well in the hospital. And I always make sure I was clean going into the kids, because that was one thing that we were told. If you even had a sniffle, you shouldn't go into the hospital because that could pass on to the kids, and it could potentially kill them. So I didn't want that on my conscience.
Yeah.
So infection prevention control was very much part of my work. Um, right from the very start. So after that, so I did that for about 7 years. No, after 3 months, I went back to Dublin, and then 6 weeks later, I came back to Bucharest. I'd raised money. I was very distraught when I came back to Dublin, very, very sad because I'd seen a lot of children who had passed away, and there was a little boy who I basically had to be peeled off.
Yeah.
Sorry, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. Take your time, Steve.
Um, it was, yeah, it was very hard, and I remember getting to the airport, and they said to me I was 11 kilos overweight,
Yeah.
and I said, "Take the bags," and I just threw them there. I said, "Take the bags."
Yeah.
I said, I don't fucking care." I said, about the weight. I says,
Yeah.
I was going crazy. I says, "You know where I've just come from?" I said, "You know where I've just
Yeah.
left?" And they were like looking at me like this, and they were like, "Oh, we're sorry." And I was like, I was in tears.
Yeah.
Got back home, and I was like this. It was, oh, it was horrific. Oh, Louise, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have
No,
messed it up. I shouldn't have messed this up for you.
no,
Um,
darling, it's important.
but it was like I had a dream about him. This little boy, his name is Alex, and
Yeah.
he uh, he was like he was like talking to me in the dream. It was
Yeah.
weird. He was like saying, don't cry for us." And he used to always touch my face with his hands. He had blonde hair and big blue eyes. And
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay, my darling.
And oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, don't say so, honey. It's okay.
So the I just something in me said I have to go back. I have to go back there now. So I spoke to everybody in Dublin. I was grabbing people in the streets and asking them for money because I said these kids need help.
Yeah.
I eventually got some money, and I went back and I rented a flat in Bucharest, and I was working with the kids in the streets, but I was also in
Yeah.
the hospital, and I had the
Yeah.
support of the doctors. Now I wasn't a nurse, I hadn't got a clue. There was a child, a friend of mine, who like how limited my knowledge was at the time was my friend's son had hepatitis B, and I went to the
Yeah.
consultant and I asked if I could donate my liver.
Yeah.
I said to me, the doctor's like, "Oh," he said, "Stephen," he says, "it's okay." I didn't even know what the liver was. Like, I didn't even know what your
Yeah.
liver would do. And he says, "Oh no," he said, "Stephen, we can't do that." And I said, "But he's only 10 years of age. Like, I'm like
Yeah.
20. I'm 23. I says, I can survive without it." He's like, "No, you can't survive without your liver." I was like, "Okay." But that's how far I would have went.
Yeah.
These kid, this was just it was just another kid, a kid in the hospital, a kid in the street, a friend's kid. Kids are kids at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But I seen like the kids were cared for in the hospital by the carers, the staff, but there was some people who were like would shout at the kids and discriminate them and say things about them and stuff like that. There was one
The
woman
kids,
who.
the kids with HIV in the hospital we're talking
Yeah,
about here.
and then the kids in the streets,
Okay.
that was even worse. Like people were kids with HIV, they were like shouted at, and they were like, I mean, I remember a child who couldn't, he was autistic, and he got a hose and he stuck it into a tap, and he started doing this, and
Yeah.
he got all the ceiling, and this carer came over and grabbed him by the ear, and he had an
Yeah.
infected ear, and pulled him. She started slapping his face, and he was like only 6 years of age. And I went over and I grabbed her, I was like shaking her. I was like, "What are you doing?" I was like,
Yeah.
"This child has AIDS. What are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing?" And I had to report her.
Yeah.
She was removed from the unit, but I was like, you can't do that to kids. Like, you can't.
No.
Um, I grew up as a child, I grew up where like I was kind of beaten
Mm-hmm.
by my own father.
Yeah.
You know, so when I seen someone hurting a child, I would react
Yeah.
like, no, you
Yeah.
don't do that. So and then I could also identify as well with the kids on the streets. Um,
Mm.
I could see that, the fear that the kids had, and um, they were terrified. Kids on the streets were abused by the members of public.
Yeah.
Um, they were spat at. Things were thrown at them. They were ignored. They were beaten by police. I remember a little boy came up to me one day and asked me for puine. Puine is bread.
Bread.
And
Oh,
this,
fine.
this little boy was 6 years of age. He was outside McDonald's in the Gata, and I obviously looked like a tourist because I didn't look Romanian. And this cop came over with a truncheon and slapped him on the back of the head. And I
Mm.
was like, he started shouting at him, and I was like, I ran after the cop, and I says, "How
Yeah.
dare you touch?" I had this humanitarian aid pass, and I said, "How dare you touch that child? Like, he's someone's child, like, you know."
Yeah.
And when he heard me speaking English, the guy just run.
Yeah.
That happened on a few occasions. Um, lots of stuff happened with the kids in the streets. Oh, where do I start? Like, I did 10 years. Like, there's like I did so much with them. But I was mainly focused on their health. Because I knew that without your health, you couldn't do anything. There was two kids that were put into an orphanage, and they were in a place called Buzău. I don't know if you've ever been there, but
No.
it's outside Bucharest, and it's maybe you can get your other half to bring you. It's
Yeah.
called Volcan the Norost, which is it's like the muddy volcanoes.
Heard of
Um,
them. Yeah.
they're brilliant. It's absolutely a fantastic place to go. But yeah, so a friend of mine said to me that his mother worked in a place called Casa de Copii, which is like
Yeah.
a children's home.
Children's home. Yeah.
And she said there are two kids who have AIDS. And he says, "Can you go and see them?" And I was like, "Sure." And he says, "Everyone is terrified of them." I was like, "How old are they?" He's like, "They're sick, 2 6-year-old children." So I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I hopped on a train, and they were street kids as well. And they were put into the Casa de Cupi. And I went there, and they weren't in the children's home, they were in a hospital. So I went to the hospital, and I walked in, and they actually thought I was a doctor.
Yeah. Mm.
I didn't say I was or I wasn't. I went in, and I'd seen that both of the kids had one of the kids had herpes on his eyes,
Yeah.
and another child had it all over his mouth. So I was like, these kids need to be transferred to the hospital in Bucharest. And in order for them to, what they did was they just gave me the kids. They discharged the children and gave the children to me. Now, I could have been anybody.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could have been anyone, and
Yeah.
they discharged two innocent children and gave them to me. And I put them on the train and brought them back to Bucharest. And I brought them to the hospital, and the hospital said they couldn't admit them. It was like around 7 o'clock. They couldn't admit them then. They said I have to find them somewhere to stay. So I asked two of the Irish nurses, two of the volunteers, if they could come and stay in my place with me. And then we brought the kids back to my apartment, and then they stayed there. So there was like three of us there, and we put the kids on this. We had this like sofa, we pulled it out,
Yeah.
and they slept on the sofa, the two of them, and then we brought them back the next morning. And then we just I slept on the floor and the two girls slept in the bed, my
Yeah.
bed. But yeah, they were back in the hospital, and then they were admitted to hospital. So
Yeah.
then they were transferred to another infectious diseases hospital, because if you had HIV or AIDS in Romania, you weren't put into a general hospital. You were put into an infectious diseases hospital. And even now, like infectious diseases, I know it is a sector of medicine, but even the word infectious disease, like when it comes to HIV, and I know it's under that, that's even stigmatizing.
Yeah. But when you were looking after, the children back in the late 80s, you were there.
No, the 90s.
The 90s, so the early 90s, did you say?
Yeah, early 90s, yeah.
The stigmatization and the treatment, not only by the staff, but also just the general public, for these children that were living with HIV, and also the children that lived on the street. What is it like now? What would you say? Has that completely gone? What would you say there's
So,
elements of that?
so I have to go back a bit. So I forgot. I didn't mention to you at the start. So when I went back after 6 weeks to Bucharest,
Mm-hmm.
I was in the schoolroom upstairs, and a little boy came up to me. I'm probably gonna cry again. And
Yeah.
he put his
You
arm
need to
around my
say this.
leg. What?
You need to say this.
He put his arms around my legs and he said, "Tuish Tatal Mau." And I was like, "Oh," and that means like you're my dad.
Yeah.
I was like,
So
"Oh," I was like, I laughed and I says, "Oh, I'm everyone's dad." Now,
yeah.
the way I'm crying here now and stuff, emotional, I would never do that in front of a patient or a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, he said, "You're my dad," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm everyone's dad anyway." So eventually, like his name was Nicu, and I he from that day when he said that to me, he stuck to me. Like all the
Yeah.
kids would cling to me, but this particular boy, he wouldn't leave me. I mean, everywhere I go, he wanted to be there. If he was in the schoolroom, he'd be like, "I want to go down. I want to go around and be with Stephen." Tata, he'd say, "I want to go down," and they'd be like, "No, no, no," and it would like cause havoc in some of his kind of like routines. And I'm like Nico, you have to stay here. I'm just going to be doing this with other children, but I want
Yeah.
to be. This was, and he was abandoned from his parents, and he had contracted HIV from, and I know it's not important how someone contracts HIV, but he contracted HIV from a vaccination when he was a baby,
Yeah.
and and that's the story that I heard, and I never dug into it to find out anything else.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and they thought he had hepatitis, and he was admitted to a hepatitis unit, which was next. It was adjacent to the unit where the kids were all kind of admitted with HIV. And when they found out that Nico had HIV, they transferred him over. And he was just like discarded. And yeah, like he never got over that. But he clung to me for years in the hospital. Cut a long story short, I ended up kind of like being like an adopted father to him,
Yeah.
like a surrogate father.
Yeah.
I was he wasn't like legally adopted, but like the doctor said to me, "He's yours. You
Yeah.
might as well take him." And then they would give me him, like,
Yeah.
like take him out of weekends, take him out to like and not just him with other kids as well. But like
Yeah.
I didn't want to just single him out and favor him. I was like,
Yeah.
Nick, to include everyone. We can't just include
Yeah.
you. And he would understand that, and he's like, "Well, they're all my brothers and sisters."
Yeah.
And yeah, so Nico he stayed with us in Bucharest, lived with us in Bucharest. Then he went. He was here in Dublin. He left, and he was working as a care assistant in a centre for children who were had special needs. So these were kids that he actually grew up with, but these were the kids sort of on the first floor. But they were over
Yeah.
18, and these kids, like, obviously they had their needs, their special needs, and they had autism, and Nico would just care for them as a care assistant. So he did that. He did a care assistant course in Bucharest. He met a girl, they had a baby, and I was going back and seeing him, and he was coming back here. And then in 2016, I lost him. He passed away through. I've never said this to anyone, but he passed away from non-adherence to his medications.
Yeah.
Which was, and then the hospital, the nurses that were there who knew him like the way I had known him since he was young, they said, a lot of the nurses said, "Afuku kumura lui." So that means like he did this with his own hands.
Yeah.
I thought that as well was very stigmatizing, but I'm like, it doesn't matter what has happened or what he didn't do or what he did do. We have to deal with what's present now. But Nicu was in a palliative stage, or in a palliative state. The doctors were fantastic. But I have to say this as well, because, and I don't know what it's like now, but back in 2016, somebody who had AIDS or advanced HIV was not given hospice care. There's no hospices in Romania. There was one hospice there's one hospice with a new hospice that opened up, and I asked a friend of mine who had worked there, I says, could he be a patient? Could he be transferred there? And he was said, "Oh no, he has AIDS and he doesn't have cancer." So the criteria to get into this hospital was cancer. But and that was the old mentality. Palliative care, like years ago, like years and years ago, like in the 50s, 60s. Like if you had cancer, oh, you're palliative. But if you had end stage COPD or end stage failure, it wasn't palliative. Nowadays, palliative care covers all chronic illnesses.
Of course, yeah, of course.
So, and I was like horrified at this. I remember Nico used to eat green bananas, and green bananas then would like kind of clog him up. And he said to me like, "Tata bras fakaka." He was like, "I want to go to the toilet." And he would talk like he was a grown man.
Yeah.
But he'd be talking like a child would say that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
He would have this he would go back into this kind of childlike kind of phase, like around me.
Yeah.
And I said to the nurse one night, I said to her, I says, "Can you give me 10 milliliters or 10, just 10 mils of lactulose?" And she said, "Navem." And Navem is like, "We don't have any." And I was like, "There's a big like liter bottle on the trolley." And she went, "Navem, we don't have any." And I said, and I couldn't like go and take it. Although I was a nurse, I couldn't go. But she was like, and she was sleeping on night duty, and I was actually caring throughout the night. And he said he needed this. I said, I'll get you some lactulose. And she was like, no, we don't have any. And she wouldn't give it. So the next morning I was livid with
Yeah.
anger
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
stopping somebody from, like, lactulose would help to ease like bowel
Yeah.
motion,
Hmm.
to help, and I was livid the next morning, livid with anger. And I said it to the head nurse. I was like, you understand I've trained in this hospital. You understand I
Yeah.
know the policies. Do you
Yeah.
understand I know, that how the system works? And then I said it to one of the doctors, and one of the doctors said, "Oh, but it wasn't prescribed." And I was like, "Doctor, we can give that even if it's not prescribed." I says, "We
Yeah.
can just get it. That's there." Like,
Yeah.
and didn't say anything to me. And she knew. I was like, but there's nothing we could have done. But anyway, um, I made him as comfortable as possible. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was there constantly. Like, I remember that night, I was lying on the bed next to him, like another bed across from him, and he called me about 37 times in one night. I was up and down the whole night, like, um, but yeah. So eventually, yeah, on the 9th of January 2016, I lost him. Um, it was,
Mm.
yeah, I'll never forget it. But
Yeah.
when I was in Romania, I met some fantastic people,
Hmm.
and people from the outside. I met this guy. He was a photographer. Um, there was a group of doctors who came from Texas Children's Hospital, and they
Yeah.
came with Baylor College of Medicine. And like, I could talk for hours because this story, my story is huge. I'm like looking at your face, and you're probably thinking, "What is he going to
No,
show?"
no, it's great. Let's capture it. Just give me 1 second because I need to go back. So we were up to the bit where you were talking about somebody that you met, some Texans from
Yeah,
the Texans Children
yeah,
Hospital who were in Romania. And one of
yeah,
these people, doctors, was a photographer.
yeah, yeah. No, no, no. I'll tell you now. Hold on. I'll just get this for you.
Yeah.
So this there was a bunch of doctors and
Yeah.
nurses from the Texas Children's Hospital. The lead doctor was Dr. Mark Klein,
Yeah.
and he went over with a team of doctors, and he went over with a photographer called Smiley M. Poole. And he is an award-winning photographer, photojournalist from Texas. And they were in Constanza, and they were in Bucharest, and they were in other parts of Romania looking at children who had HIV/AIDS. And he wanted to set up something, so they set up the Baylor program in Constanza. But Smiley and the doctors were in tech in the hospital where I was in. I don't want to mention the hospital. Um,
Yeah, fair. That's fair
um,
enough. Yeah.
so they were there, and then I was there, and Smiley says hi. He says, "I'm Smiley," and I was like, "Hi." He says, "I'm Steve." And he's like, "You're not Romanian." I was like, "No, I'm Irish." And he was like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I says, "Well, I volunteer here." And he said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yeah, I've been volunteering here for maybe about 3 years." He's like, "Oh," and he's like, "And how did you become like a volunteer?" And he
Yeah.
just started asking me questions. So I told him basically what I've told you,
Yeah.
and I said, "I don't just work here. I work with kids. I work with copii strezi, which is like, it means street children."
Street children. Yeah.
He's like, "Okay," and he was really intrigued and really listened, like, really into what I was saying. And he says, "Would you mind if I just followed you about, like was yeah, like your shadow?" And
Yeah.
I was like, "Sure." Um, so he went off and took these pictures. Um, he just took pictures of me, with the kids in the streets and the interactions that I was having with the kids. And then he sat down and he said, "No one is talking about this, Stephen." And I was like, "No, they're not." And he says, "Has any of these kids, do they have HIV?" And I says, "I don't know yet." I said, "It's hard to get them in for testing. They don't want to go to a doctor. They're terrified." But like I also volunteered with an organization called Fundacja Parada, which was like a circus organization. We had like a thing called Cabinet Medical, where like we had this kind of a medical cabinet, but it was in like a back of a truck.
Yeah.
They were a French organization, and I went out with a pediatrician and a social worker, and the kids would just come to me, and I would bring them to the doctor, and I would stand there and basically, support the kids while they were being examined, and they had no nurse, but they knew that the foundation knew that I was training as a nurse. And so they asked me to do, dressings and stuff like that. I had already got that experience even prior to training as a nurse.
So can I ask you, what is a connection with Smiley and the Baylor Clinic?
So Smiley and Baylor was Baylor College of Medicine had all these doctors, and Texas Children's Hospital. They had this kind of partnership, as far as I know. And Smiley was the photographer. So Smiley went back after his week in Bucharest with the doctors, and Dr. Klein says on the flight, he says, "So what you've seen in Romania, what are 3 things you're going to do for these people?" And one of the things Smiley says, I want to document this.
Yeah.
So for over 20 years, is it 20? No, so for over 10 years, over 10 years, Smiley kept coming back to Bucharest on his sabbaticals and paying for his own flights. And he was photographing and making pictures of these children living with HIV/AIDS, and would meet me for maybe a day or two, and he would just go. We just go into the streets, and we would just photograph everything like that we'd seen, and just the work that I was doing. So what he did was and then that project in Romania went to like places in Africa. I can send you the video of this.
Yeah.
It's called it's one of the videos that Smiley did, and he published a book a few years ago, and it's called Through the White Door. If you can see, I don't know if you can see. No, you can't. It's not clear.
It's blurry. It's a little bit blurry. Through the White Door. Who is it?
Through the White Door by Smiley Pill.
Yeah.
So this book has all his images of Romania, pictures of Nicu, and pictures of Through the White Door. Basically what that meant was so there was a white door in a clinic somewhere in Africa, and the mothers would say, mothers who were living with HIV would say, if you bring your child through that white door, your child will get on ARVs and your child will be saved. So that's why he used that thing, Through the White Door, because all the mothers were saying that. But it's a fantastic story. There's also another person in the story.
Yeah.
I met her once. She was a little girl who was born with HIV, and her mom passed away, and she was adopted by a lady called Sandra, and her husband was a military person, and I think they lived on a camp somewhere in South Carolina. And Janie was one of the first children ever to go on ARVs.
Oh, wow.
So Janie came to Romania when she was 6 or 7,
Mm.
and she went to Constanza, and she stood up, and well, Nicu came with me, and Nicu and Janie met in Bucharest, and she didn't speak Romanian, he didn't speak English, and like they were like they just were like stuck together. They were like just typical kids. They didn't even care about the language. It was just like it
Yeah.
was sign language. But they went to Janie went to Constanza with her mum and the doctor and Smiley, and I got an invitation, so I went down with Nico, and Janie stood up in a crowd full of about 50, 60 people. They're all official people. And she stood up with a microphone and she says, "Hi, my name is Janie McQueen. I'm 6 or 7 years of age." She says, "I live with HIV and I officially opened this centre for children." So Nico was in the background, and it was like about 2 o'clock, and I said, "Nico, come on, we have to give you a medication." And at that time he was on a lot of medications. And they were very big tablets he had to take.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hate taking them. And I'd say, "Come on, you need to take them." So I'd break them and I'd give him one bit by bit. And I'd give him and then I'd give him some food to eat. And then on the way back to Bucharest, he was very quiet. He just was looking out the window, and he was about 12, and he basically he didn't say anything to anybody. And also, just to mention, we were never, as volunteers, we were never allowed to talk to the children about HIV. And we were never allowed to tell them anything about HIV. So we were all just,
But you mean about their diagnosis? They were living with HIV and you were not allowed to tell them?
no.
Nico didn't know at that age.
Well,
Oh,
he didn't know. As far as I know, he didn't. As far as I knew, he didn't know.
yeah.
So he went back to Bucharest, and he was sitting on the train looking out the window, and we brought him back to the apartment, and he had a bath. I gave him a bubble bath. He used to love bubble baths because he used to have a shower in the hospital, but he couldn't have a bath.
Yeah.
So we had a little tub, and we put him in the bath, and he would sit there in all the bubbles. And then he said to me, he said, "Stephen," and I was like, "What?" He's like, "Vino what?" He's like, "Come here." I was like, "No. Get out of the bath, get dried and dressed, and then come and then see me in the sitting room." And he eventually came in his pajamas, and he sat down, and he's like looking at me, and I was like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Yeah," and he says, "Stipe Janie," he said, "You know Janie?" And I says, "Yeah," and he says, "Ari HIV." Like he says, she has HIV, and I says, "Oh," I says, "Yeah." He says, "What's Che HIV?" He says, "What's Che is the HIV?" And I says, "HIV is a microbe." I says, "It's a microbe. It's a virus." I says, and he says, "Mm-hmm." He says, "Yo, Amasha Chiva." He says, "I have that," and I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, never forget him. He said to me, he said, "Stephen," he says, "Do you schmecker?" He says, "You know what schmecker is like?" He's like, "You're very cunning, you're very sly." He says, "That's why you Irish people are here in Romania," he said, because he says, "because you all came over here to look after us." When he said that to me, the floodgates opened. Oh my God, I cried like a baby.
Yeah.
I was curled up in a ball, and I grabbed him, and I said, "I know I'm a volunteer, and I know I'm here." And at that stage, like we only got like a little bit of access to him to come out for like weekends and stuff. And I said, "Look, I love you. I says, I grabbed him like this and I says, I love you so much. I said, I was kissing the face off him. And I said to him, I said, no matter where I am in the world, no matter where life will take me, I says, you ever need me, pick up the phone and I'll be there for you.
Yeah.
And he was crying. And I said, I says, HIV is just a virus. I says, he says, yeah, but people don't. He said to me, oh, he said, you treat us, you like all you Irish people treat us so different than our
Yeah.
own people. Our own people don't. Our own people don't treat us the way you treat us. And I was like, we have to teach them. We have to teach them. I said because they probably are afraid. He said, but what
Yeah.
is there to be afraid? He says, you're not afraid of me. He says, what? You're not afraid. You let me sleep in your house. You let me have a bath. You let me eat in your plate. I says, yeah, because you can't contract HIV. And I says, you're a healthy boy. I said, look at your medications. Look at all the medication we have here. You take all those. You take your meds. You stay healthy.
Yeah.
And that'll keep you alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like it went on for a long time, like,
Mm.
but and he was very, very upset. But what I did was I contacted Dr. Christina, one of his doctors, and I says, Christina, this, and she was on call at the hospital, and I told her what had happened. And she's like, okay, leave it with me, she said, Stephen. And by Monday morning, like Nico had to go back to Monday morning because he had school. So
Mhm.
he went back to the hospital and he told all the kids that he told Stephen that he had him, that he
Yeah.
had HIV, and all the kids started talking about it. And what they had to do, they had to get psychologists, counselors in,
Ah.
because at that stage they didn't have it. So then they start getting psychologists and psychotherapists in, or
Yeah.
psychologists in to work with the kids. So the kids were like 12, 13. They were kind of like, in their teenage years.
Mm.
So yeah, so then a whole other story kind of opened up there. Um, because we had to tell kids like about the birds and the bees, and because
Yeah. 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 Of course. Of course.
we
So,
didn't want young kids on the ward becoming like pregnant, so
of course,
yeah.
and yeah. So, what brings you, Stephen, to the work that you're doing at the moment with photography? Where did that come from and that idea?
So the idea came from the kids that I worked for. So I trained as a nurse in Bucharest, qualified here, and um I worked in HIV care here in Dublin. Um, there was one stage at one point, the only one at one point in my career working in HIV, that I actually got scared um of a person living with HIV. I actually was looking after a man who had very advanced HIV in a hospital in Dublin,
Yeah.
and he vomited, and there was blood, and it kind of splashed, and it kind of hit me, and I was like, I said to my manager, "Oh, would I have contracted it?" And they were like, "Well, you go and get bloods and stuff like that," and it was a moment of panic,
Yeah.
but then. And then that stage, like the ARVs, I was like, the ARVs were like they were on so many ARVs as well back then. Okay,
What are ARVs, medication?
ARVs are antiretroviral medications that
Okay.
work on a cellular level
So
in the
that
body.
people know. Yeah.
Yeah, so they work at a cellular level. When a person ingests an ARV medication, antiretroviral medication, that medication breaks down and it works at a cellular level to stop the replication of HIV from
Yeah.
making other copies of its virus in the blood.
Yeah.
Kind of puts like a damper, or kind of, it stops it and kills it in its tracks.
So was the guy that was bleeding when you had that moment of panic, was he on ARVs?
No, he was a prisoner from a Dublin prison, and he also was very dependent on substances, and it was just a moment of panic. Like now, when I was working in Romania, I had a little boy. His name was Christy, and it was during the night, and I had kind of like, Christy was palliative. Christy was about 7, and I was kind of fixing his sheets, and I put my hand down on the bed, and the bed felt wet, and it was in a dark room, and I was like, oh, he's after wetting the bed. So, and I had no gloves on me, and but he also had an IV in his hand, and I actually when I turned on the light, my hand was covered in his blood, and I had no cuts, nothing on my hand. I washed my hands, reported it, and every 6 months during training, we would have to be checked, and we'd have to have HIV tests done. It was mandatory.
Wow.
So
your photographic exhibition, your photographic project.
So
you were saying you got this idea.
Yeah. So the photos that I'm taking, it started off in COVID times, when I did a course in. I'm a self-trained photographer, and I wanted to get some kind of qualification, so I did this photography course here in Dublin for 2 years, just to have a bit of paper. And there was a part of the course where it was on documentary photography. To get our final mark, the teacher said, like, what are you going to do for your project? And I said HIV. And people were saying, like, oh, that's an old illness. And then I remember the teacher saying, well, like, Stephen's a nurse, he'll tell you, like, he'll show about HIV, and he is working in that field. So I did it in a way to give these children a voice, because these children were called Kopi Nimenui, which is like nobody's children, but then also to give people living with HIV today a voice, because I actually interviewed a person recently, Sebastian, he's Romanian, and he said he didn't want anyone living like in a box, or living. It's tough to kind of live with this illness, or this chronic condition, and also on top of the stigma as well. It can be hard. HIV as well, it can be complicated sometimes, but if you take your meds and you attend your regular visits, you can live a happy, healthy life, just like anyone else. I live with type 2 diabetes. A lot of my friends, they take 1 tablet a day. I take 9 tablets a day, and an injection once a week. So, and if I know if I didn't take my medication, I would get really, really sick. Like I say this to people, I don't know what all the hype is around. Even back then, like HIV, it's a tiny virus. And there's all this drama. It's like, please just remember, these are human beings like everybody else. And I just photograph people, I meet them, they tell me their stories, and I just document what they tell me.
So how many photos have you taken so far?
Well, since 2000, for the first 9 pictures I took, it took me 2 years to do 9 images. But now that COVID is finished, like, people have been contacting me and reaching out. So at the moment, I have about 40, maybe 40 something pictures, but I have other pictures. I've done about maybe 60 portraits,
Wow.
but
Wow.
it's an ongoing documentary. It's not like people say, when are you gonna stop? I'm like, I don't want to stop.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, and
Yeah.
I don't want to leave anyone behind. Like, so
Yeah.
anyone who's like watching this or seeing this, this video, if they want to contact me,
If
they
they
can
want
contact.
to, if they're living with HIV and they want to be
If they're
seen
living with HIV, yeah.
and they want to be
Someone who's
seen.
living with HIV and want to be seen. Yeah, and I love
Yeah.
when you said that to me because when we met, you said to me like, "Oh my God, your pictures like you really make
Yeah.
people feel seen."
Seen. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because people hide so much with HIV and they don't want to be seen. But I feel your project is a collection of people living with HIV. It's just not one
yeah,
person, it's a community
yeah.
of people
So,
being seen.
yes, and it's like as a nurse, like I see people who live with HIV all the time, and I don't say, "Oh, do you want to be part of my project?" I would never do that, you know.
Yeah.
Never would I ever, do that. But like
Yeah.
people who have come forward, and I've approached people who are not my patients,
Yeah.
or have no kind of involvement in my, nursing practice. They've come forward, and I also have a responsibility over all you beautiful people who have given me, the permission to use your pictures and your stories.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and I want to care for you the best way that I can, like
yeah, well,
for you.
you do, Steve. So what we'll do, we'll put the link if people want to get in touch with you, be part
Yeah,
of your project, your photography project, they can get in
yeah,
touch with you directly. I have one more question for you,
yeah.
lovely Stephen. If there's people out there listening to your podcast, what would you say to them?
I would say there are lots of support out there. There's no need to be afraid of living with HIV. There are lots of people who care and understand for
Yeah.
you. It's not a death sentence. You just take one pill a day and you live a happy, healthy life. I myself don't live with HIV, and I don't mean to be condescending or taken away from anyone who lives with HIV. I might as well be living with HIV because the amount of stigma I have seen, and like people have even stigmatized me on the socials, on my socials, like, have you got AIDS? Do you live with HIV? Are you HIV positive? And I'm like, no, but like, what if I was, like, who really cares? Like, at the end of the day, even answer the question like that, like it just doesn't make sense. Like who gives a shit? It's very like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like when you wouldn't say to a person, "Oh, do you live with heart disease? Or do you live with diabetes? Or do you live with dementia?"
Yeah.
Like they're chronic illnesses, and anyone can live with it. It can affect anyone, and HIV can affect anybody.
Yeah.
And in
It
a
doesn't
way,
just it doesn't discriminate, does it, Stephen?
no, it doesn't discriminate against anyone. And like I know, the kids that I worked with, they contracted it through mismanaged medical practices. That's all I'll say about that. But and everyone else is like, I actually, when I meet people in from my documentary, I don't even say, "Oh, how did you contract HIV?" I don't even
Important.
care.
Mm,
There's no
mm,
point. And
yeah.
one thing I learned at the very start of nursing was it doesn't matter how a person contracts HIV, it's how they actually look after themselves. And also, I have to mention mental health is
Yeah.
huge in HIV. And if your mental health is being affected, talk to somebody, reach
Yeah.
out to me. There was a man who there was a man in my project. He's a beautiful man, and he basically reached out to me back in October last year. I was at a clinical conference in Warsaw, and my name was dropped in some thing online, and he contacted me, and he said, "Why do you take pictures of people with AIDS?" And I said, "I don't take pictures of people with AIDS. I take pictures of people who are thriving and living with HIV."
Yeah.
He was discriminated. He said, "Well, I have AIDS," and he was discriminated really, really badly by medical professionals. And he had side effects through medications that he's taken. And then he just got so scared, he shut down. And he says, "I don't want to take these medications." His viral load went very, very, his CD4 went very, very low. And he ended up contracting advanced HIV, which we used to call was AIDS. We actually don't use the word AIDS anymore.
Use that one. No.
We use advanced HIV. So for 8 months, I was on the phone, on the WhatsApp video calls, speaking to him every day about how he is, talking to him, talking about his mental health, just being a friend to him, giving him like peer support from a nursing perspective. And he left the country of where he was from and is now in another country and is back on. He went to a hospital, he was admitted to hospital, got care, and now he's back on his ARV medication. And
Great.
He's living, and I met him there like recently for the first time, and it was just brilliant. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. And I'm sure there are going to be many people listening, people with HIV and people who are not living with HIV. I think you've touched on so many subjects here. You touched on working in an environment that had a lot of poorly children. You know, you talked on travel, you talked on your childhood. I think there are so many things you've touched on, Stephen, that people will be able to relate to. I want to thank you so much for coming on to Aunty Lou's. I think the voice is really, really important. And if you stay on the line, we'll have another little chat. But I'll end the recording now. And I just want to say, this recording is going to be in memory of Nicu.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for watching Aunty Lou's Hour. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe.